I don't live in a very, very Jewish world. What I see as my role at the CJN, in part, is having this bigger picture of how society at large sees Jews and being kind of prepared to understand it. So on October 16th, 2023, I wrote a column really just asking, where would a Jew not be considered a settler? This was at a moment where Jews were being accused not only of being settlers anywhere in Israel, not specifically in the West Bank, and also anywhere in North America, and basically just looking at this question of where on earth is there a consensus that Jews can live and that that's fine. Sometimes the answer isn't a place, but it is rather that there are people who think Jews should not live. My name is Phoebe Maltz-Bovey, and I'm the opinion editor at the Canadian Jewish News. To support this kind of work, make a tax-deductible donation at thecjn.ca/donate.
לאחר שמדינת ישראל לא מילאה את חובתה ואת הברית הכי בסיסית בין המדינה לאזרחיה, כשלא הגנה עליהם ולא מנעה...
That was Israel's President Isaac Herzog speaking to his country on Wednesday, urging the government to ratify the hostage deal with Hamas. Herzog said that on October 7th, the state of Israel failed in its duty and the most basic covenant between a state and its citizens when it didn't protect them and didn't prevent their abduction. He calls the ceasefire hostage deal the right move. Quote, there is no greater moral, human, Jewish, or Israeli obligation than to bring our sons and daughters back to us, unquote. Now, former Canadian ambassador to Israel, Vivian Bercovici, didn't write Herzog's speech herself, but his message is one she fervently agrees with. Since the Hamas attack on Israel 15 months ago, Bercovici moved from Tel Aviv to live near where the October 7th attacks happened. She's now based in a kibbutz in southern Israel, close to the Gaza border, from where she can hear the IDF evacuation flights taking wounded soldiers from Gaza to emergency medical treatment. Bercovici reports on Israeli politics for her own news site and podcast called The State of Tel Aviv, and is a frequent columnist for Canadian outlets, too. Israelis, she says, are torn about the hostage deal. She says it's partly because it's taken so long that it's feared many of the 98 remaining hostages could be dead. And they're upset because it's taken so long that the deal appears to be nearly the same one that outgoing U.S. President Joe Biden originally pushed for 8 months ago in May, but couldn't get buy-in from Israel or Hamas. And since then, more Israeli soldiers have been killed, especially in recent weeks, and more hostages too, and Palestinian civilians. Yet she has a message for those who say Israel capitulated and agreed to release hundreds of Palestinians convicted of terrorist attacks who could carry out more October 7th in the near future.
The psychological impact of October 7th will be felt for generations, and we need to restore the promise. There are already people talking about not wanting to serve if we don't bring them home. People don't want their kids going, because how do you offer up your child to serve if they may be left to languish?
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Thursday, January 16th, 2025. Welcome to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, and made possible in part thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. While Canadian relatives of the remaining hostages wait for confirmation of who are the 33 who are supposed to be coming out over the next 6-week-long ceasefire, lists are being circulated publicly, but Vivian Bercovici prefers not to add to the family's anguish by addressing them. However, she is privy to some major changes in how the hostage handovers will be carried out this time, a lot differently than how it happened with the 100 hostages who were freed in November of 2023. Away from the cameras this time, with more security for the hostages while they're still in Hamas hands. And Israeli hospitals are gearing up too. Sources tell her they're going to treat the hostages like Holocaust survivors. For more on the mood on the ground in Israel and why she thinks the deal is the right thing to do, I'm joined by Vivian Bercovici from Israel.
Thank you so much, Ellen. It's a pleasure to see you.
What is the mood there right now in Israel about this deal? Are people happy? Are people unhappy, or both at the same time?
Everything. I think people are exhausted emotionally and physically. And there's just so much agony and anguish. So anytime that there's the prospect of having hostages come home is obviously incredibly powerful and joyous. But as always, it's kind of, tempered with the fact that many of them aren't going to be alive. We have no idea what they've gone through and what kind of condition they're going to be coming home in. And we also are leaving behind many men who will have to wait and see if we can negotiate them out. And then we're also releasing more than 1,000 really bad, nasty murderers. And, one of the people being released was one of the terrorists who attacked the Park Hotel, as you'll recall, in the early 2000s in Netanya, where I can't even remember, was
That was
40
how
people.
they were having the Seder.
Yeah. So there's a lot of anguish. It's interesting. The religious Zionist cohort demographic, which are people who, work and serve, and they've really carried a disproportionate load in terms of army service throughout this war, and they're angry. And I want to try to understand this more than I do now, because many of them feel that their sacrifices and the deaths of some of their friends were in vain, if we're going to just capitulate. And I see it differently. I don't see it as a capitulation, but that's kind of, to answer your question, everybody's all over the map, all over. I think that we are a very tired people and country, very tired. It's been an excruciating 15 months. And when you're tired, you don't make good decisions sometimes, and you don't think clearly. It's just like in real life. And I live in the Western Negev, southern Israel, but the northern part of southern Israel. And I'm very close to Gaza. I hear when the helicopters are going overhead. I know before it hits the media when there have been soldiers seriously wounded or killed, because they evacuate them always by helicopter. I hear the F-16s. I hear what's going on. And we've been losing 4 or 5 soldiers a day. It's quite a clip. And that uptick in deaths has really kind of started. It started about 2 weeks ago, and it was like leadership was saying war in Gaza, we're done. We've destroyed them. And then all of a sudden this happens. And they're kind of, reviving. And so I just feel that you have to know when to cut your losses. This is not a one-act play. It's not going to end now. There's going to be renewed conflict at some point, but there's no other way to get the hostages out. And we just simply don't have, in my view, the reserves in our tank to continue fighting this horrible war. And you know what? The suffering on the other side is also just, it's horrible. It's all horrible. It has to stop. We have to get our people home and bury them and start to rehabilitate the ones who are alive and get a good night's sleep. We really need a good night's sleep.
There's a lot to change between now and Sunday. Do we know what time the release is going to happen, or they haven't told anyone yet?
You know what?
Nobody
It's
knows.
just, we're on Spilkus. No, I mean, like last time, remember, it was like those cliffhangers every night and waiting for lists. We know very little in terms of time. I can tell you that there are, I believe, 8 hospitals where they've been working really, really hard in Israel to prepare for. They don't really know what they're prepping for. They don't know what people's condition's going to be. We know some people are probably coming out on the brink of death. There are massive preparations going on at the border crossings that are just a few kilometers from where I am to prep for the family. I think what we're going to see this time is a very different procedure. You'll recall how the hostages came out and their trucks were being pounded on and the windows weren't covered and there were Klieg lights on them and civilians. And I have read or heard on one of the news reports in Israel that one of the issues that was really being nailed down was not having that circus again, not putting the hostages in a position that they feared for their lives. So I expect it'll be much quieter. There will be no press taking those initial shots of the hostages or their families. I think that we're going to see a much more private process and reunion. We have some information and reason to believe that not only are quite a few of them in very challenged physical condition, but also their psychological well-being. And, I just want to make it, give me 1 minute to sort of just make this really real. You'll recall when Yocheved Lifshitz, and I don't remember, Yocheved Lifshitz and another woman, elderly woman, were released after 2 weeks. And Yocheved was very unwell physically. And she said she would have died within a day or two had she remained in there. But she talked about how difficult it was to go down into the tunnels when they took them down. They were barefoot. It's muddy. It's wet. There's rocks. And she was at the time 83 or 84 years old. I think, I don't remember exactly. It was painful. And then they're down there for 2 weeks. And then they had to climb out. And the ladders to climb out are very rickety, unstable, shaky things. And it was very, very difficult for her to do that climb out. And there was a medic who sort of helped her and supported her and got her up to climb 60 meters. The people coming out now have been underground for very deep underground since November 2023. We expect that they will be malnourished, dehydrated, underfed, have many physical ailments. We know many of them are injured. We also know that when the 6 hostages were murdered in late August, that one of the reasons they were shot in the head was because they had been Sinwar's human shields and they had to leave in a hurry and they were too weak to move quickly. And so they just shot them. So when you really kind of start thinking through the details and how complicated and beyond difficult this is going to be, and they don't know they're being rescued. They don't know they're being released. Maybe they'll be told, maybe they won't. They may just think they're being moved. But physically, how they're going to make the journey, I think, is something that is of concern. Again,
How many do people think, this sounds horrible, but there's supposed to be 100 hostages left. How many are, the 33 are the only ones still alive? Is that what you're saying? And the rest are body bags? Because we still have Canadian woman body that we want back, right? The body of Judy Weinstein had guy.
First, when the 2 Druze men were found dead last week, I believe. So the number is now 98. And in the first group, which will be, metered out over 6 weeks, there will be 33. And the question is, of those 33, how many are alive? We do have the names. Now, the Prime Minister's office hasn't confirmed these are the names, but there's a list that's in circulation in Israel. And so we have a pretty good idea as to who's coming out.
Tell me
on
more.
Sunday. I'm not going to do it for the record. We've been asked not to speak about things by the family forum and by the government. And I'm going to honor that. The families are just in a horrible place. And it may be that the lists will be accurate. They may not be. Every time something goes public, it creates stress for the families and rumors and things go around social media, and it's terrible for them. Having said that, there is a list. It's different from the list in May, June. There are some differences, but there are, in the first stage, there are 3 women. Our belief and expectation is that they are all alive. And then there will be women and children released. Now, there's one family that meets that criteria, and that's the Bibas family. And the Bibas family has torn this country apart because what everyone's talking about now is it doesn't matter if they come home in coffins or alive. It's all horrible. It's just all too horrible to imagine. There has been a claim made by Hamas since November 23 that Shiri and the boys were killed in an Israeli airstrike. We don't know if that's true. There was an interview on TV tonight with Shiri Bibas's cousin, and he said he still actually is allowing himself to hope till the very last minute. The expectation and belief is that Yarden, her husband, is alive. And then the 5 female soldiers, again, we don't know if they're all alive or not. We hope. And then there will be men over 50, and then all men under 50 Hamas considers to be of military age. So they are, however, releasing, I believe, 11 who they say are either ill, severely injured, and or humanitarian cases. I mean, we're all waiting. Hamas could just decide, you know what? They're not going to release 3 women on Sunday. They do whatever they want. That's, I don't know where it's at.
I'm Michael Weisdorf, Chief Executive Officer with the Canadian Jewish News. We've put a lot of effort into trying to engage with the younger audience and the younger demographic, those who haven't really engaged with the CJN recently. They don't realize we're back. They say, I absolutely remember reading this on my Booby and Zadie's dining room table or my parents' den. We're trying to bring the Canadian Jewish News into the 21st century. The Canadian Jewish News is a not-for-profit organization, and we're also a registered journalism organization with the CRA. So we can provide tax receipts for donations at any level to help support the Canadian Jewish News and help us continue providing free, high-quality journalism for the Jewish community. You can support us at thecjn.ca/donate. Thank you for your support and for being a part of our journey.
You mentioned religious Zionists a minute ago, so I want to go back to that. Ben-Gvir and Smotrich said they've blocked previous deals before and were proud of it. So do they have any power to do the same here? And
So, yeah.
what is the process?
So first of all, Ben-Gvir, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who leads Otzma Yehudi, he's basically a Kahanist, a disciple of, JDL. And Ben-Gvir, it's no surprise to me or to anybody who's here and immersed in it all the time. It's been very obvious that Prime Minister Netanyahu has chosen to capitulate to Ben-Gvir's pressure to stay in power. So there's been this kind of ragging of the puck. I mean, this particular agreement is the same agreement being talked about last May, June, July. Ben-Gvir has put out public statements. He made a video. He's been boasting about how he torpedoed. It's great. The Hebrew word for to torpedo is letarped, I learned today. And he's torpedoed these deals in the past. And he's also come out in the last few days and said, I will vote against it. Now, the good news is that the opposition will support it, Benny Gantz and Lapid. I'm not sure what Lieberman's going to do in the end because he was on TV the other night speaking against it. But they've got Bibi covered. They're going to support the deal. So even though Ben-Gvir's in the coalition and voting against it, that doesn't matter. And then the other player is Bezalel Smotrich, who leads the Religious Zionist Party. And Smotrich hasn't said yet whether he's going to vote for or against. He's talking around it. He's saying he doesn't like it. He thinks the war should go on. He will only support it if we go back into Gaza after a ceasefire. Smotrich's main thing throughout this war, and particularly as we've been getting the upper hand in the Gaza Strip, has been he wants to go into Gaza and resettle it, him and Ben Gvir. And they don't think we should be withdrawing, and that's where he stands. So Smotrich is a bit of a question mark, but the truth is, I think that enough of the opposition will carry it, and it will get through.
What steps do you know that need to be done in order for this to start on Sunday with the release of hostages?
In terms of exactly who has to vote on it and whether it goes to security cabinet or full plenary of the Knesset, I honestly don't know. And frankly, I think that there's a little uncertainty even here with respect to what exactly the steps are, which is pretty kind of typical. Having said that, whatever they are, they will be done. It just will be done.
Is this going to be seen as a victory for Hamas or a victory for Netanyahu, or somewhere in between, or both, just like we talked about at the beginning?
So for my view, it depends who you talk to. My view is there is no victory for us. We lost on October 7th. And we still have to come to terms with that it happened at all, that so many people were taken hostage, that in effect, the state did not exist for 12 hours. And that's the part that's so kind of Holocaustish about this, is that it takes us back to, for a very limited period of time and very distilled, where we have no state to protect us. And it was that extreme. Everyone disappeared. The army disappeared. The Air Force disappeared. The government disappeared. The only person who has resigned was the chief of military intelligence. And that was General Aron Haliva, who to this day maintains what I think is an incredibly arrogant stance that, Hamas were a bunch of punks and they were punching above their weight, and he wouldn't take it seriously if he was in the same position all over again. I mean, it's just incomprehensible. He's the guy who wouldn't be interrupted that Saturday morning, until after 9, because he was on vacation in Eilat. Other than Netanyahu, though, everyone has assumed responsibility. And they have made public statements to that effect and said they intend to go. But Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, is the only one who refuses to take any responsibility. And he's been saying, oh, they didn't tell me. It's like, you grill everyone. You question. You're brilliant. You probe. You're Mr. Security. I just find it difficult to believe that he sort of sat back and didn't push. Those are all the reasons why we desperately need a state commission of inquiry. We need to understand, at the beginning of all of this, I said to a friend of mine here, 7th generation Israeli, Likudnik, Mizrahi, the whole deal. And he was saying, he's got kids in the army, they're boys. He was saying, we have to have an inquiry. I said, why? And he said to me at the time, and I agree with him now, he said, I want to know how wide and how deep the rot is. And what we've seen since then, over the last 15 months, yes, there have been successes and triumphs. There have also been a lot of really unfortunate circumstances and decisions, and they're accountable. The head of the IDF, the Air Force, the government, and the Shin Bet, and they want answers. And everything since then has just been us kind of trying to get back onto our feet and our legs and take control. Some people look at this as a capitulation, a failure. And they say the hostages they're, I guess, expendable to people like that. It's really sad and unfortunate, but we should sort of sign them off and continue on and destroy Hamas, okay? Bibi's used the slogan total victory, and various members of his coalition talk about destroying, and I don't understand, and many people don't understand, what do you mean by destroy? Because we thought a month ago we were there, and clearly we're not. And we're kind of chasing our tail now in the Gaza Strip, and the climbing casualties show that. Some people have said, oh, look, they're dancing in the streets in Gaza and in the Arab world, and we've humiliated ourselves. Well, I don't agree. They dance in the street whether they win or lose. And this is, in my view, a much more difficult calculation to make here, who won, who lost. The Arab world has always spun even defeat into victory. But am I supposed to look at my own actions and my country's actions and my moral matrix? Am I supposed to, do I want it to conform to how they judge it? I understand the concept of deterrence, and we need a deterrent capability. And given everything that's gone on in the region in the last 15 months, with Gaza, which is a pile of rubble, I'm sorry to say, with Syria, with Iran, with Lebanon and Hezbollah, given all of
The
that.
Houthis now and all of that.
Exactly. So, I mean, we've definitely reestablished and reasserted our deterrent capability. There's no question of that. But destroy, those are the same words that Sharon used. I was here in 1981 and 82 as the buildup was happening going into Lebanon. I was a student at university. And Sharon constantly talked about destroying the PLO. Well, he didn't destroy the PLO. The PLO is the PA, basically, today.
On that point, you talked about the regional geopolitical changes that Israel made happen in the last 15 months. Everybody's thinking that this was a Trump present for his inauguration. But I wonder if, and you've even written about that, how true is that? This has nothing to do with Biden? Where does the Trump threat of all hell to pay loose, all hell will break loose, play into this deal and the timing? Because as you said, it's the same timing it's the same deal as it was in May. So
Yeah, but
why wait?
Biden couldn't get it over the line for a whole bunch of reasons. There's no question that the Trump effect is real. And the Trump effect is very real in the Middle East. He is feared and respected. And he's feared and respected because he is perceived to be strong and he follows through. So recall when Assad was using chemical weapons against his own population, and Obama issued his big red line threat in 2013, I believe it was, and said, you cross or you use chemical weapons against your people, and, basically his equivalent of there's going to be hell to pay. And the chemical weapons were deployed and Obama retreated. When Trump made the same threat, he followed through. And I mean, that's really significant. He's taken very seriously in this region. And, there are lots of theories as to why, but the fact is he is. The first hostages are scheduled to be released on Sunday. He said it better be before my inauguration. And I guarantee you that Trump is going to come out and say, it's not a good deal. I would have done a way better deal. But I wasn't president. But it's the best deal we could get with Biden. You know what? At the end of the day, we should be grateful to both of them, in my view, because the administrations worked cooperatively. They have both talked about working cooperatively through the transition, and it's extraordinary. And today, Trump's his national security advisor was making like fiery statements. He said, I don't care, even with this deal, even with the ceasefire, Hamas is going to be obliterated. He said they're terrorists, they're evil, they're satanic, all that kind of stuff. And we're going to get them. We're going to rebuild Gaza, but Hamas is just not going to have a foothold in there. So we're entering a very different kind of dynamic and environment. I want to try to understand myself better over the next few days why many reservists feel that their sacrifices were in vain because of this deal. I feel for them. I am so grateful for everything they've done. I really do struggle, though, just to understand that. Someone I respect a lot was saying that her husband feels that way, and she said they wanted to see this to the end. And I don't know what the end is. I don't know. Is it to settle Gaza? What is the end? We're at an end right now. We got to stop. We all need a break.
How different does this feel now than November 2023 when the first 100 hostages were released?
Totally. Again, there's the just overall exhaustion, deep in your marrow fatigue, despair. And the psychological impact is something I think I'll be kind of, trying to understand for the rest of my life. But I made the comment earlier about this kind of being for 12 hours, the state did not exist, right? And it's kind of like, the lesson again that we needed to, I guess, learn again, that this is what happens when you don't have a state. Don't take the state for granted, people. And this state exists for one reason, and it exists to provide a safe haven for Jews. It's a country that exists that on the promise that Jews can come here and be safe, and that when they're here, they're safe. And should anything befall them in war or in peace, that their fellow citizens and their government and their army will move heaven and earth to get them back. And it's on the basis of that very foundational promise, ethos, that people go to the army, that they risk their lives, that they send their children, that husbands go, because they always believed and knew that the country would be behind them. And if we don't honor that, then we have to ask who and what we are. And that's, to me, one of the many reasons why the psychological impact, and Sinwar understood this very well, we have to keep that promise. And that is, that's another kind of open wound. I think that people who oppose the deal feel that we need to keep our eyes on a bigger issue, which is, again, destroying Hamas. And in order to do that, part of what we need to do is reoccupy Gaza. I don't share that view.
I'm so grateful that you spent the time with us to prep us for the weekend. We'll be watching.
I'm always happy to talk
Praying.
to you, Ellen.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily. Our show is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman. The executive producer is Michael Freeman. And our music is by Dov Beck-Levine. Check the CJN website as we get reaction from Canadian relatives of the hostages from coast to coast as the story develops. And thanks for listening.
Right after October 7th, the CJN really had a challenge of how we were going to cover what we knew was going to be the most important story likely of our journalistic careers. And we think about what are the stories that we uniquely can tell. We have strong and deep ties and relationships in the community. We can go to the same event that everyone else, all the mainstream media will cover, but we will cover it differently. We'll cover it smarter because we have an understanding of the context and the nuance of the communities that we've worked in. My name is Lila Sarek, and I'm the news editor at the Canadian Jewish News. The CJN wants to continue to cover important stories across the country and important stories in Israel as well. And we can only do it with your help. Visit thecjn.ca/donate to support our work. And if you live in Canada, you will also receive a Canadian tax receipt. Thank you.